All right, we are now live, streaming live. And we usually wait just a few minutes to kind of let people get on before we get started. So we'll just give ourselves a few minutes here.
You guys, while we're waiting, can put in where you're joining us from.
Mientras estamos esperando, pueden poner en dónde están ubicados.
Participando nessa reunião. Obrigado.
Welcome everyone. As you're joining us, we're just waiting a couple more minutes to get started to allow people to get on.
Bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides. Estamos esperando unos cuantos minutos para que estemos lo suficientes y podamos comenzar.
Boas-vindas a todas, todos e todas. Estamos esperando apenas alguns minutos para as pessoas poderem entrarem no webinário para podermos começar. Obrigado.
Welcome everyone who's joining. This is the Indigenous Environmental Network's webinar on feminisms and Indigenous women. We're just waiting a few more minutes to get started.
Bienvenidos, bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Este es el webinario de la Red Ambiental Indígena sobre mujeres indígenas y feminismos.
Boas-vindas. Essa aqui é a Rede Indígena Ambiental e nosso webinário, parte do série de Feminismos Ambientais. Obrigado por estar aqui conosco e vamos começar agora.
Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to begin by asking our interpreters to speak with us a little bit about language justice and the feature for interpretation if you need it. And then we will start our program off, but I'm going to turn it over now to our interpreters to help us get started.
Hola, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Como pueden ver, este va a ser un webinario multilingüe. Vamos a tener interpretación al inglés, al español, portugués y lenguaje de señas americana. Silvia, ¿lo quieres decir en inglés?
Hi, good afternoon, good night. As you can all see, we're going to be having a multilingual webinar tonight. We're going to be having interpretation to English, Spanish, Portuguese, and American Sign Language.
Olá, boas noites. Espero que estejam bem. Como vocês podem ver, essa reunião vai ser uma reunião multilingüe. E hoje à noite temos a participação em inglês, espanhol, português e idioma de linguagem de señas americana.
Para las personas que quieran acceder a la función de interpretación, van a tener que venir directamente a la reunión de Zoom. Van a ver el enlace en el chat de la transmisión en vivo en Facebook, Así que si quieren acceder directamente a la interpretación simultánea, tienen que unirse al Zoom directamente, pero si ustedes hablan y entienden el inglés, se pueden quedar en la transmisión en vivo por Facebook.
Buenas noches. Good night, I'm sorry. If you're going to be listening to the webinar presentation in English, all you have to do is stay in Facebook and you're going to be able to do so. However, if you want to hear it in Spanish, you'll have to join the Zoom meeting. So you'll find the link in the Facebook chat.
Se você quiser participar da reunião em inglês, você pode continuar aqui na reunião no Facebook, mas, porém, se você quiser participar da reunião em português, você pode acessar o link para entrar diretamente na reunião do Zoom, que você pode acessar no evento do Facebook deste evento. Muito obrigado.
Y por último, en unos momentos vamos a activar la interpretación de Zoom. Aún no está activada, pero cuando la activemos van a ver, para las personas que están en el Zoom, van a ver en la parte de abajo de su pantalla un globo que dice interpretación. Por favor, hagan clic en el globo, después seleccionen su idioma, sea inglés, español o portugués. Si se unieron por teléfono o tablet, en donde van a encontrar esa opción de interpretación es al ir a los 3 puntos donde dice más y siguen los mismos pasos.
If you're going to be using the interpretation feature in Zoom, you can, once the platform is activated, you're going to be able to see a globe and you click on it and you're going to be able to choose the channel that you want to listen into. And that would be English, Portuguese, or Spanish. If you are joining us by phone, you have to click on the 3 dots and then you can choose your language. And when you are done choosing your language, you have to click on done and then you're going to be able to listen.
Para você participar na interpretação, que vai ser ativado agora mesmo, você tem que clicar no globinho que vai aparecer embaixo da tela. Quando você for clicar no globinho, você vai poder selecionar português. E aí você tem que clicar terminado para poder escutar e participar dessa forma na reunião. Se você estiver participando dessa reunião, através de um telefone inteligente ou um tablet, você vai seguir os mesmos passos, clicando nos 3 pontinhos na tela embaixo no lado direito. Clicar nesses 3 pontinhos, vai aparecer serviço de interpretação, selecionar seu idioma, português nesse caso, e clicar terminado para poder participar e escutar a reunião em português.
Okay. We're ready to start the interpretation function and we can do a test. Vamos allá a comenzar con la función de interpretación y hacemos una prueba.
Vamos agora começar a função de interpretação e vamos fazer uma prova.
We're ready, Jennifer.
Sorry, Zoom's giving me a little bit of a hassle. So just one moment, bear with me.
So if you're just joining, we are just getting ready to start our webinar. The interpretation function is getting settled on Zoom. And for those of you watching on Facebook Live, just hold tight for just a second and we'll get our beautiful program started.
Los que se acaban de unir, estamos arreglando algunos problemas para poder activar la función de interpretación en Zoom y por favor espérenos unos momentos porque vamos a comenzar con nuestro programa bello en unos cuantos minutos.
Para que vocês saibam, estamos resolvendo algumas probleminhas no Zoom, alguns problemas técnicos, e podem esperar alguns minutinhos que já vai começar a nossa reunião muito bela. Obrigado.
So actually, I think while we're waiting for the interpretation to get started, we will begin with our prayer to get us started. And we've asked one of our panelists to start us off in a good way, to open this in a good way. We're going to be dealing with some very heavy topics. And so we really want to get ourselves in the right space to have this discussion together. So I'm going to turn it over to Elga.
Hello, everyone. With deep thought and deep prayer. Ich clan 5 en toteo tatsin. Ich clan 5 en toteo pilsin. Ich clan 5 en toteo yewatsini panemoani. Totatsinini wikat. Teo pinsintekut lienatzatlan. I palnemoani en tomuanchan. Yayolomi en tlatikpak. Yayolomi en tlatikpak. Tlatzokamati o meteo o misiwak. Tlatzokamati coatlicue. Tlatzokamati mayawel. Xochiquetzal. Tlatzokamati ayot. Con estas palabras pedimos a la luz divina que los dé la conciencia y corazón para hablar para todos ellos que no tuvieron esta oportunidad. Pidiendo siempre por nuestra Madre Tierra, todos los elementos sagrados con quien no podemos vivir. Siempre pidiendo para la generación que todavía no llega a esta tierra y pidiendo para todas nuestras hermanas por toda la isla de Ayot. Pidiendo siempre a la luz divina que los ilumine el camino para poder cumplir con nuestra misión aquí en la tierra. Inclaneshka en Tonatiu, que su sol sea brillante, may your sun always shine brightly. Thank you.
Thank you, Elga. Thank you so much for that. It's very important that we center ourselves and get ready for this very deep conversation. And I see now that the interpretation feature is on Zoom. So please click the globe icon on the bottom and choose the language that you would like it to be spoken in, Spanish or Portuguese. And again, we have ASL interpretation here on Zoom. So you can watch that if you need it as well. So I think we're going to get started now. So welcome everyone. We are so pleased to have you on the Indigenous Environmental Network's webinar series, Indigenous Feminisms. And tonight, our focus is on fighting violations on the land and body. And I'm going to lay the context a little bit about the conversation before we introduce the panelists. And I'm going to be speaking slowly because, again, we have interpretation. And for language justice to be effective, we have to make sure that we take that into account. So I'm going to introduce myself and then my coworker, Benishi. So my name is Simone Senogles. I work at the Indigenous Environmental Network, and I've worked there for 20 years, and I work on our Indigenous Feminisms program. I am Anishinaabe Kwe, Indigenous on my mother's side, from the Red Lake Nation here in northern Minnesota, and my father is white from Argentina. This topic is very personal for me. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about have happened in my own family. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that with you later. But first, I'd like to introduce Benishi Albert.
Français, good evening, everyone. My name is Benishi Albert. I am Anishinaabe and Yuchi. My mother is from Southern Ontario, Chippewa Thames. And my father is Yuchi from Oklahoma, although our original homelands were Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, in that area. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And I just wanted to share a little bit about our Indigenous Feminisms webinars. We realize that feminism means many things to many people. And from an Indigenous context, it also is a very complex term. And so instead of trying to provide a definition of what Indigenous feminisms is, we have decided to do a series of webinars to discuss and unpack the complexities of issues that fall within Indigenous feminisms as a way for us to build deeper understanding about what it is, what we're working towards, and what we're trying to undo in terms of colonial impacts on our peoples, and especially the women and femme-identified peoples in our community. So this series has included a number of topics from identity, mutual aid, food, and we're going to continue to bring forth more topics going forward. And this evening's topic, Simone already shared with you around violation of land and body and what does that mean to us. And also to share that these webinars and the work that we're doing in this program spans colonial borders, which is why we have the other languages here. Many Indigenous peoples in the global South also have to, much like we do here in the North, have to hold English as a language. In other countries, the colonial language is Spanish or Portuguese. And we want to make sure that we continue to connect and reach with Indigenous peoples of this hemisphere in a good way. And that's why we are intentional about using other languages or having interpretation in other languages to include other women of and make connections along North and South outside of any nation state borders. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Simone?
Yes, thank you everyone. So I'm going to lay a quick context before we get to our amazing panel. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. Many of the topics are very rich and we could spend considerable time on all of them. So we're going to be touching on some topics today that are interwoven together. And I'm particularly pleased today to have our panel because we as Indigenous feminists understand that we build power with our sisters, our Black sisters, our Brown sisters, our white allies, and that we understand that we are in struggle together, and that our concerns and our struggles are intersectional. So today, as we know, the Indigenous Environmental Network is an environmental justice organization. So that will be one of the big lenses that we look through today. And environmental justice, while it may be a new term, is an old concept that Indigenous and Black and Brown people have been embracing for a very long time. And it's about protecting Mother Earth, our environment, our communities, our own bodies, ourselves, our future generations. And we will be talking about reproductive justice, the right to have or not have children, with whom we have our children, and how the world is that we raise our children in. Our right to have the future generations in safe environments, with clean drinking water, with enough food, with livelihoods that provide for our families, to raise our future generations in violence-free, in a violence-free world, and in a place where our future generations can grow and thrive, and where they have hope. We're going to be talking about immigrants and refugees, and looking at colonial borders and the way that we reject those colonial borders, and we welcome our brothers and sisters, our relatives. We're going to be talking about frontline and essential workers, those who do very, very important jobs, who are sometimes putting their lives on the line, who are deemed essential, but also sometimes considered disposable, who are not respected, who are not kept safe. We're going to be talking about capitalism and colonization, and particularly the commodification of the sacred, the commodification of the body, and the commodification of the land. Two things which should never be commodified, right? And so we're looking at that connection between violence on the land and violence on the body. And what happens to the land happens to the body. And we are looking at the moment that we're in. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. We are in the midst of the rise of very repressive political regimes, and which exacerbates our health crisis. So we are trying to place ourselves in these moments. And really, I believe that we are looking through different worldviews. So we have a worldview that embraces life at the center versus a worldview that places profit and capital at the center. And our bodies and our lands, our health, our well-being are caught in between. And lastly, we recognize the intersectionality between all of these things. So environmental justice is reproductive justice, is gender justice, is immigrant justice, is racial justice. All of those things, they're all together, and we build together. We build power collectively. So on that note, I'm so happy to be able to introduce our panelists. And forgive me, I'm going to read the bios. I have not memorized them yet. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then I'll turn it over to them. So first, I would like to introduce Elga Garza. She is of Azteca Chichimeca and Cuahiltecan ancestry. And from 1991 to 2001, Elga managed a 300-acre land-based project in Brownsville, Texas, within the US militarized zone, and operated a center for social change, Casa De Colores, dedicated to indigenous thought and culture. Presently, Elga Garza is committed to developing a sustainable and regenerative food system in the state of New Mexico. Elga is the executive director of Agri-Cultura Network, a cooperative and network of 40 small-scale Black, Indigenous, people of color, organic farmers. Elga is committed to developing an environmental economy that builds community health and well-being. Welcome, Elga. Thank you so much, and thank you for leading us off in prayer. The next person I would love to introduce, and so honored that you're with us, is Miss Don Wooten. Don is a licensed nurse practitioner in Georgia. She recently made headline news as a whistleblower exposing abuses within a detention center in Georgia. She spoke up about forced sterilization of immigrant women detained in Irwin County Detention Center. And Don raised her voice to speak for the treatment of the women there. Welcome, Don. Thank you for joining us. And lastly, Lede Mansfield. Lede Mansfield is a journalist, organizer, activist, strategist for social change, and founder of Hello Racism. She is the organizing programs director with Project South, and Lede mentored young women of the Southern Rural Black Women Initiative and was born and raised in South Georgia. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to your baby too, who I saw earlier. We love having the kids on here, so don't even feel shy about having them on. We love to see them. So thank you so much for joining us. And I think we're gonna spend now some time hearing from our panelists finally. And we're gonna give each panelist about 10 minutes to just, if you could share a little bit about yourself and your work. Yeah, we'll start with Elga, please.
Thank you, Indigenous Environmental Network Feminist webinar series, for inviting me and being a part of this. It's my honor. And well, my name is Helga Garza, and I currently reside in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm originally from the Mission San Francisco de la Espada in San Antonio, Texas. So a little bit just to touch base on the border restrictions. I am a child. As a child and all my life, have dealt with the border, have had to show papers, have had to identify myself. Once you leave the border area in Brownsville and Matamoros, Tamaulipas, and you're heading north, within 2 hours, you have another checkpoint. So all my life, that has been a reality of mine. And growing up in that environment also opened up my consciousness at a very young age as to racism, injustice, and even at a very young age recognized environmental injustice. For 13 years, I managed a land-based project, as it was mentioned, in Brownsville, Texas, where we worked on cross-border environmental and economic justice work. So during that time, there was a lot of birth defects that were flying off the charts on both sides of the border, connecting it throughout the years, connecting those birth defects directly to contamination of water. Contaminated by who? US companies that moved in and built the maquiladora industry in the southern part of the border. Polluting the most sacred element that we have, the water. So as you know, we hear about the whistleblower, the people, the women that are out there, the ones that are taking effect that say, this isn't right, something's wrong here. Well, that's what happened, in our years in Brownsville. Too many birth defects. OGBYN doctor, Dr. Carmen Rocco of Cuban ancestry, was the first one to call it out and say, something's wrong here, this can't be. Checked her numbers, checked everything, went to Matamoros health people, same thing, on the rise. She connected it with the Brownsville Community Health Clinic, another woman of Apache ancestry that ran the clinic, Paula Gomez. They connected it and they said, this is too big for us. So they went to Austin, to the University of Austin, connected it with the epidemiology department. And this is how it all started and came to light, of exactly what was taking place within the buildup of the maquiladora industry in the southern tip of the US-Mexico border. The maquiladora industry ran on the borderline for 125 miles, from Upper Valley, Reynosa, all the way to the southern part of the state of Texas and Mexico. And we're talking about the last 125 miles of the Rio Grande River. So for many years, working on both sides of the border and actually seeing the environmental racism that was taking place. And right now we're talking water, but there were a lot of elements in the air. Currently, what I'm doing here in Albuquerque and have been for the last 10 years is developing a local, sustainable, regenerative food system, working with Indigenous, Mexicano, gente de raíz, working with small farmers using organic methods to grow food, and really doing the educational piece of bringing those farming methods, that food sovereignty piece, seed preservation, and more than anything, making our community healthier, connecting us, and really connecting us not only as people that work the earth, but people that protect the earth. And we're also doing it within an intergenerational approach for those reasons. And I think we all learn from each other. Everyone has their place on this path. And I just want to say that we have been working really hard on a lot of different levels over the years. And when I left Brownsville, Texas, due to heavy militarized zone activity, my family was in danger. I had to face the federal judge. I was 36 years old. I still had young children. And I had to face the federal judge wanting to lock me up for 7 years and fine me $60,000. For what? For moving water and soil samples across the border that in our migration stories that had been left to us by our ancestors written on deerskin called códices, tell us our migration stories. Tell us how those were ancient trade routes, how our people came from the Gila caves, traveled south. We know our stories. So it's really hard when you're living in a militarized zone, maintaining a ceremonial ground, and at the same time, you see injustices. You see people carrying their babies crossing the river, asking for a meal to eat, a safe place to spend the night. So with that, I bring the voice of all of those that I came across in those 13 years on that border, and everything that I witnessed and I saw as injustice, as environmental racism, as racism in economic prosperity. So with that, I am honored and I am excited to get this dialogue going. Thank you.
Thank you, Elga. Yes, you brought up a lot of really, really important things. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. There's a lot to think about in what you shared. I would like to go to Ms. Don Wooten now. Ms. Don Wooten, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your work? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Don Wooten. I'm a licensed practical nurse. I've been nursing for 11 years. 10 of those years across the board, symmetrically, or 6 have been in a prison system where I was a correctional nurse. Inside of the facility, and really begin to look at things differently and retrospectively when COVID hit. The facility became a real big eye-opener to poor health conditions, to poor medical conditions, to, and I referenced inhumane conditions. We had not the proper PPE. There were several of us inside of the facility along with detainees that had underlying medical conditions. The facility that I was employed in was not reporting to the CDC and was not reporting to the health department. They were not even reporting to us to let us know who was positive. It was swept up under the rug for some time, you know, saying we don't have COVID. There's nothing going on in this facility. And as a nurse, I've referenced in a couple of interviews that it became a silent pandemic inside of a pandemic. We were not to talk about it. We were not to voice it. We were not to let anyone know what was going on. I myself, a sickle cell carrier, underlying condition. I'm a single mom of 5 children that I single parent myself. They're asthmatics. So wanting to know what was really going on and to have detained women to trust me over a period of about 6 years. You know, the first report that I received, she was 23 years old, said that she had been outside and had to have a hysterectomy and was waiting to go back home, which was her original land in Mexico, and was afraid that her husband was going to divorce her when she got back because she found out that she had a procedure that she was unaware of. She stated no one explained it to her. Left the facility, returned back this past October, and I had several more women with the same story that was told years in retrospect to the story that I was given sometimes. So I could only imagine these ladies waiting. Why was I chosen? You know, I oftentimes ask myself, what made me so special to bring this to me 4 years later in a capacity over meetings that I've told 20 plus women, you know, talking about having procedures and it not being explained to them. And as a healthcare provider, I've been nursing for 11 years. I've been in the healthcare business for 23 years. And you have a code of ethics that you honor. I honored my code of ethics that when I stepped inside of a facility of any type, whether it was hospital, nursing home, childcare facility, even prison, the detention center, that was a vow and a personal thing to me. To my life was not mine. It became the lives of others. And I've learned to see my life through the lives of others, putting myself in the shoes as those women were. I'm able to birth. I birthed 5 children. I've had that warranty and that knowledge to know that I have a choice to give life. I have a choice to bring life on this earth. I have a choice to live in this nation as an African-American woman of color. I have a right. And you look at it from that standpoint of saying, of all ethnicities, that I built alliances and I built friendships with these ladies on the inside. It became more than just a nurse that passes their medication. It became a ear, a sister to sister while they were on the inside. And I felt compelled to repeat what I was told, to ask questions, to ask why, to find out where the accountability lied in this situation. I know I did not want the accountability to lie with me for not having a voice. So, you know, here I am, this whistleblower in Georgia that has spoke up on behalf of not just the brown and the Black skin, but all nationalities, of all ethnicities and all races and all colors, you know, to know that as a woman, as a female partner, as a sister, that I felt the need and a compelled to come forth and say, hey, this is what I was told. Where do we go from here? And my, hey, this is what I was told, and where do we go from here, led to a demotion. It led to me being demoted from a full-time job to a non-job, single parent, 4 children in a household, 1 kid in college, mom. So now my life has been transitioned to depending on my sisters, as well as we one for another, to help take care of us in this next shift and in this next move. So I'm honored that you would allow me to be a part of this panel, to share my experiences as a African-American woman inside of a detention center, through the lenses and eyes of others. So thank you. I'm honored.
We're so honored, thank you. And you just stated all of the things so succinctly and so beautifully, just really bringing it to the forefront. I think it's like you said, it's not a coincidence that your voice has been called forth. So I'd like to turn now to Lady. Are you on with us still? I don't see her. Oh, there you are.
Hey, you all. So yes, thank you. It's already been great. I'm here, you all, and just heads up, I'm on and off camera because I got 2 boys here. And we are balancing right now. But it is great to be with you all. As said, I'm with Project South, the organizing program director with Project South. And we've been around for 30+ years with the mission to end poverty, end genocide and poverty. And much of what we're talking about today is connected. So what excites me about this opportunity and being here with you all is I grew up in the South. I grew up in Georgia with Miss Wooten, and that's something that we share in common, that experience of being in the South. And one of the things that's a part of my experience in growing up is the significance of land and what that means in terms of all of us. And that's the land, the significance of what that land was before my ancestors came over on the transatlantic slave, and those that were here, so maybe some of your ancestors, and what happened during colonialism that came and gave a different definition to what land meant, or attempted to give that. And that to me is tied to all of this that we're talking about, whether it's feminism, and for us, it's important to say feminism, but also to recognize Black feminism as he is a Black woman, also being feminism that takes in a particular understanding of the experience of Black women on this land and what that has meant. But it's also connected to environmental justice and what it has meant around the land and the significance of it, but what had to happen to our land that we have cultivated and used for years that has treated us well. But when male, and particularly in a white supremacist system, when white men and others came in and used that land in order to enslave us and change a different dialogue. So that's significant. But it also ties into reproductive justice. As I said, I grew up not far from Ms. Wooten, and my own experience is much like those of my aunts, those that came before me when it comes to the medical system. As I said, I have 2 boys, and my firstborn, when I was 7 months, I had to go to the hospital because I was having some complications. A paper was brought to me that they asked me to sign. I said I wouldn't sign it until I read it. The doctors got very upset that I wanted to read it. I was signing for an emergency C-section. That's what I would have been given permission to. But part of that journey, which we don't have enough time to go through it, but is much like the journeys of the women that we know, that I know, that are Black, but that I know that are also my brothers and sisters that are Indigenous, and those that are from other countries that are in this country, those experiences are the same. And I think too, the capitalism, and at the top, we named those things, but what all this means in tying in capitalism and what the system had to continue to do, the false education that had to be given, the things that we've had to practice, that brings us to having a conversation like this that makes it necessary. And so as Project South, we've been working, organizing around this, listening to this, but also acknowledging that there is a culture of people that were here before this system took place in the way that we said it. And there's a culture that is intact that was attempted to be wiped away from my folks, African folks that are in this country, that I am glad conversations like this is giving rise to, causing us to face it directly, but also to have the discussion so that we can relearn those things that was misinformation, so that we can share those things that we know culturally that are the truths that hasn't been told to us, and so that we can tackle these things straight on to really create a world that acknowledges the land for what it was meant to be, that acknowledges the truth, which means it calls out the lies and confronts it right on, and that brings us to a place to unify. So for me, growing up in Dawson and Albany, Georgia, I was born in Tennessee. My folks are throughout there. My parents, my father purchased land later on for our family that was significant for him because he was able to pass it on. The land that my father purchased was very close to the land that his father's friend was hung on. We later learned the history of that land before it was plantation land. That land, of course, like all of this land, was indigenous land. And so this conversation is also critical because it allows us to start making those links. It allows me to decolonize what I was taught about where my father purchased land at, the experience I had growing up, and to say, no, that is a lie. We shall speak truth. We shall unify amongst that truth, and we should give honor to the land that has protected us and covered us, even though the system paid it no regard. And so again, I am grateful and thankful for this opportunity to be here with you all, with Ms. Wooten, and to be crossing these barriers, making these connections, and coming out powerful in a way that continues to create and move powerful movement along for the progress of all of us.
So one of the comments in this chat that said speak, and yes, what you said, all of that and so much more. And you know, a lot of what you said just really resonates with me, and I'm sure it's resonating with a lot of our listeners. And that connection between land and our bodies as women is so important. And you know, I'm thinking about decolonizing, right? And so for our communities, women held a lot of power before colonizers came here, a lot of power within society. And so we understand that in the efforts to take our land, that colonizers understood that attacking women was an effective strategy to do that. Attacking the pillars of our community, the backbones of our families, are women. And I'm gonna quickly share a story and then ask my next question. So I mentioned before that my mother is Indigenous and my father is white. And in my mother's side, my great grandmother, Anna, she died right after childbirth. And it was due to racism within the healthcare system. The doctor put their knee on her body to push out either the baby or the afterbirth, or we don't know which one. And then she died. And we know that that's a legacy that not only my family has, but that many families have. This injustice around reproductive rights of Indigenous women. And then it has an effect that continues, right? So her children were all taken to boarding school after that, where they were, you know, not allowed to speak their language, exercise their culture, where they experienced terrible things. And so the matriarchy of my family was what's that word? The matriarchy of my family was interrupted, right? And so we understand that when we reclaim our rights to our bodies, we are also reclaiming our rights to our land, our responsibilities of taking care of Mother Earth, and our sacred duties in relation to those roles. And so when I think about feminisms and what they mean to me, I always think about what is my job in this moment, in my generation? What has my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, what is their job been? And so I'd like to ask this question, and I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. I'm gonna start with Ms. Wooten, and I would like to ask you, what does feminism mean to you? I know we have other words for it, sometimes womanist, women leadership, women power. There's a lot of ways that we can think about it. And I would love to ask you, what does feminism mean to you?
To me, feminism is, and I would agree with the definition of woman power, to have the innate ability, because it's already engrafted in us as women, to have a voice. And for an example, with the way times have changed, the voices have almost been snuffed out. You know, we've been taught that we can follow, but we've been taught that we can't lead. So I believe that as being a feminist, it's a leadership role that coming back to term to know that we do have a voice and that we are able to proclaim and express those things that needed to be expressed. Even, for example, with myself, it came through expression, but with penalty. So, you know, that control is still there, or is still on the rise. And it makes it harder for some of us as women to speak out. You know, I look for more to come forth, even in this area or arena that I'm in, because there was more of us that saw and seen and heard and knew what was going on. So to have that actual voice and those concepts, to know that now that we're in a different era, that as feminists, that our voices are now on the rise and being heard in a different tone, in a different text or different context now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Women power. Whatever we call it, we know what it is. We recognize it and we foster it in one another. Elga, would you like to speak a little bit about what feminism means to you?
Well, I will start by saying that my strength and everything, that all of my challenges throughout my life the strength comes from my lineage of my mother, my grandmothers, my aunts. I am a daughter of an activist. So since I was 5 years old, holding on to my mother's skirt as I watched her be a leader in our community. This is a woman that had a 3rd grade education. She was the oldest of 15 brothers and sisters. So she was not given that opportunity to stay in school. But kept learning through the books and learning how to read on her own, all of those pieces. But this is a woman that made significant change for a better quality of life for my generation and those that have come after. So with that type of upbringing and teaching, it really builds. Like, I remember I was 10 years old when I saw my mother in action at a city council meeting. First time I ever saw civil disobedience at that level. I was 10 years old and scared and proud at the same time, you know. So, and seeing my mother leading, you know, and all she wanted was pave our streets, put us infrastructure so that we can have flushing toilets, have a bus come through to pick up our kids for school. So those were some of the changes she made throughout her life. So commitment is another one, you know, and for me as a Native woman leading a cooperative of regenerative farmers in agriculture, I have to step into an arena of men with suits that have tried to talk down to me and tell me that they perfect the science of growing food. So I'm like arguing our point, the earth is the science of growing our food. So for me, in our traditional ceremonial life, in my lineage as Azteca Chichimeca, we follow a military hierarchy, but women can hold the ranks in ceremonial life equivalent to any man. We can be the generalas and command capitanes of grupos. So we've always had that within our tradition. And I think that gave me a lot of insight as to how our women have been developed throughout the generations. And I do take it back, if we take it back in what colonialism has done, I mean, but we got to take it all the way back to the doctrine of discovery to really see the root cause of colonialism, you know. And for the US, it was no longer the doctrine of discovery. It was called the manifest destiny. So these are all terms and ways of looking at people that weren't at, again, to govern, to cause genocide, to rip the land of resources, and given them the title of God-given rights. So in all of that upbringing, and I think in our educational system, and I am very fortunate that I had a strong mother and a strong father to tell me, oh, that's bullshit, that's not right, that's a bunch of lies. And that's what they told me when I would be taking home a history book or a geography book or whatever. And they would pull out the real stuff. They would take us outside, make a fire, look at the stars, and tell us our creation stories. So I was very fortunate in that way. So what I bring to the next generation, my grandchildren, is those same teachings. We all come together and we maintain our ceremonial calendar together. We were all together in Standing Rock. Took my grandchildren with me, my daughter, my son, all of us were there. So I think those are the teachings that really frame, and for them to see women leading, to see their mothers, their aunties, their grandmothers on the front line and telling them, don't be scared. We're protecting here. This is who we are. This is our destiny. This is our labor of love for our Mother Earth and all we hold sacred. So with that, I've been able to be a courageous woman because I had courageous women as my mentors along my life.
Thank you, Elga. So Ladi, as I'm listening to us talking about future generations, I can't help but see your beautiful little one on your lap. So I wonder if you have anything to add and what kind of, what you're thinking about as you're raising up your children and what you want them to know, or how you would talk about, you know, the world you want for them. You can answer that and the question that we were talking about, whatever you want to talk about.
All right. Well, that sounds good to me. So on feminism, I definitely think in addition that feminism is the ability for women to own who they are, whose they are, and what it means in their community and what position they take in it. That's not something that's scripted out, written out, that we accept as an example of a manifesto, but it adheres to the culture practices of what we know to be true and how we function and act in it. So for feminism and thinking about it from the standpoint of a Black woman, it also gives acknowledgement to the experiences that we have gone through, and this would be for any women, when it comes to class oppression, when it comes to racism, when it comes to sexism, when it comes to capitalism. It gives acknowledgments to that and allows us to move and function in response to that, that may not be accepted in a world that functions under those systems, but it is accepted within ourselves and within our culture and our practices. So I do want to bring that out. Example, I have on my grandmother on my father's side, is she raised 13 children. She didn't graduate from anybody's school. She grew up in Graves, Georgia, which was a plantation. My family was one of 4 families that were there. And my grandmother was also a farmer. My grandfather did it. I knew the last sharecropper in my family, and he knew the last slave. And the land that I grew up in was right down from the land that they farmed on. And so I think for my grandmother, when I think about her strength and what it meant in the other women in that circle, no matter what was going on, my grandmother defined what her role was in that house. Now, of course, if I could talk to her now, she probably would tell me some things like, baby, this is not the direction I would want you to take for some things. But what I do know is she passed down to me what it meant to know your position, to hold it, to stand in it, and stand in the truth of that, and what that meant to fight. My other grandmother was one of the first, in the first graduating class of what is now Tennessee State University. She died at, I believe, 87. Not too long ago, she passed away. But to think about what it meant at her age to be amongst the first class graduated in college at that time is something that's pretty significant to me. So one of the things that I want to pass down to my sons, which we are constantly in discussion about when raising them, is how are we going to teach them who they are, what they are, and what their mom is and who she is? How will we teach that in a world that wants to define it for them? And when I say a world, a system that would like to define who they are, but more importantly, what I am as their mother. That world, that system needs to define it. And the reason why it needs to define it is because if it can tell them who their mother is, what I'm supposed to be, and they're able to successfully do that, then they could produce sons, my sons, that will allow a system to continue to function in the way that is not best for us. So I think part of my role in feminism is to come up against that and be able to honor the culture and my ancestors, their ancestors, and to be able to teach them different, and teach them different with the focus on, this is what the world's gonna teach you, but this is the truth that you should stand in and work in no matter what happens, and know that you will be taken care of as you do it.
I love our panelists. So thank you so much. Ms. Wooten, I'd like to go to you next. You know, you spoke about the oath that you took when you entered the healthcare system, and that space of integrity that you are occupying when you're doing your job, you know, and that it's a place of caring for others, that it's not just you, it's about other people. And, you know, you talked about that silence is part of the pandemic, right? And that COVID opened your eyes to some of the more horrendous abuses that were going on. And so I'd like to ask you within that context, you know, as you walk into this with your oath of, you know, in your personal integrity and your professional integrity, can you talk a little bit about the intersectionality that you experience or that maybe you witness between racism and sexism in your work? And who and what do you think perpetuates that system? I know that's kind of a long question, so.
In the, of course, you know, we're living in a male-dominant system to where, you know, there's a male at the top of the place that I worked at. And working inside of the place that I worked at, Irwin, we as women, and especially African-American women, there's not a whole lot that you're supposed to say inside of this place. You know, you take your marching orders and you carry them out, whether they're correct or not. Is how that is basically set up. And, you know, whenever you veer from those orders, then you're made an example, so to speak. So as long as you take them running, you're going to be fine. You're going to still be employed. You're going to have a job. You're going to be able to feed your children. That's that systematic control. And then once you step out of line, then I have to have someone to do something to you to tap you back in line. And coming along with that, I'm very different. I'm cut very different. My mom can tell you that I'm her challenging, is, if that's a word, child. I'm going to challenge what's asked, and I'm going to challenge, and I'm going to ask why. I have a kid that's 22 years old that grew up just like me. So it is true that, you know, as you grow as an adult, you'll see it again in your children, which I love that about him. I love it. We don't see it a lot of times whenever they're small, but he has that with him. He's going to ask why. So when COVID came and COVID hit, you're not going to get a COVID test unless you're exemplifying a fever. You know, even though you're symptomatic. That was what I ran into. The orders from the head down were, you know, nobody gets tested unless they're running a temp. I came across a detainee that had a temp. One nurse said she took it, was 97.8. I went back to take it, it was 101.8. I had a full-fledged discussion with my supervisor about, hey, he has a temp, but this nurse took it. It can't be right. I just took it as 101.8. So we come into a full discussion. 30 minutes later, I went back, it's still 101.8. And I come back to this discussion with her and saying, hey, we're both nurses. In general, you're superior. What do I do? Instructed to give the individual some ibuprofen, which I refused. You know, why are we not COVID testing this person? Why does this person not have a COVID test? This person's in a dorm with 25 to 30 other people. So are we going to look out for these other people that are here in with this person? And it takes a lot in a southern part of the state to speak out. You know, you already know what's going to transpire. But like I said, it was automatic. You know, males rule. That's that dominating factor that I talked about earlier, to snuff out the voice. Even though we're both nurses, you're at a hierarchy than I am, and you're my supervisor, but you're still adhering to this male voice that's not in a medical position. That's something I was not willing to risk my medical career for someone that does not see through the lenses that I see through. I'm down line, I see what's going on, I see it firsthand. And the second part of that question, could you repeat it for me, please?
Yes, the second part was, oh Lord, what was? Help me out, Benishi.
What do you?
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah. How do you think that who perpetuates that relationship between racism and sexism in healthcare? Who's perpetuating?
Yeah, how is that system perpetuated? And I think you did mention some things about it already. Yeah, but you can, if you want to talk more about it, we're happy to listen.
I think you did it, but yeah.
The male domineering, the system is male domineering. You know, you have us, whether we're nurses in a place, that I can speak from a nurse, and then you have officers also that are in a place, it's male domineering, that, you know, hey, I'm a guy, I can handle this better than, you know, you can, or, you know, you're not qualified to speak or even input in this area. And that is where, you know, I come from, just a rebel in that area, to where I work hard for my nursing license. I had to do it by myself. And I took pride and honor in that. So just it's male domineering. It's Southern and it's male domineering.
Yep. And I'm going to have a real quick follow-up for you too. We've got about 15 minutes left. But I was watching an interview that you did in your car. It was so cool. But you know, the person asked you, like, how can we change this? And you said something that just struck me. You said, well, it's not going to change until we change it. You know, and I was just thinking that's such a simple but powerful statement. And, you know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, a little bit more about what compelled you to just, where you just couldn't be silent anymore? I mean, you talked about your rebellious nature and what, you know, when you're day in and day out with people in the detention center, you know, can you tell us a little bit more about why you just couldn't remain silent?
After being there sometime, leaving, coming back sometime, you know, life transitions you unawarely. And as a adult, and then as an adult female, we are emotional beings. And we see things different. And when you have adult women coming to you in tears, and adult women, it's almost like a plead or a cry, like, hey, Miss Wooten, we missed you. Where have you been? What happened to you? This is what we have going on. So hearing, you know, you weigh everything contextually, because I weigh everything, and you can hear the sincerity and an actual cry inside of another individual. And this is where we switch roles. I now put myself in the position of a migrant or an immigratory woman, not just because when I come into the facility, I know at some point I'm going to get to go home. Whenever they come into the facility, it is a matter of time whether they know the time span or they don't know the time span. Some of the women that I came in contact and encounter with have been there several years. You got 8 years, and you have them there 4 years. And, you know, I'm leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back to this cry and putting myself in their position. What if it was me? I have a daughter. And I think this was the aspect that kind of turned things significantly for me. I need her to have that ability to say, hey, what are you doing to me? What's going on? What's taking place? And why is this taking place? Not with them coming to me saying, hey, Miss Wooten, I was given this, told to sign this, and woke up like this. I want her to have that voice. So I switched roles. When I started going to work, I came to work as a detainee, not a nurse. So I'm detainee to detainee now. And I'm mother, not just detainee, but now I'm mother to mother. Because these women have kids that they have to go home to and they're wanting to go home to. And then you have those that I encountered that I think at one point I had a girl that was pregnant at one point that was there throughout the time earlier on in working there at the facility. So I want to know what the conditions look like for myself if it was me, because at any time life can take a turn, and systematically was what happened to me. They can say, hey, this is what's going to happen to you. This is how you're going to live the rest of your life, just by me making this decision from the head down. So me speaking out, it led to, if it was me, what if it was my daughter? What if it was my son? You know, going in and then talking to them, because I was a sick call nurse for some time. So you have that interpersonal network there to where I prayed with them, to where I encouraged them. When I came to work, I saw individuals, I didn't see orange jumpsuits. I saw lives and livelihood and people wanting to get back to their normal everyday life. Every day I walked in, I knew I was walking out. But the time frame for then and the cry for them led to me saying, hey, why? What's going on? Who's accountable? Can somebody tell me something different? And in getting too close, that became the punishment or the sacrifice, because I don't want to use it contextually, but I became the sacrificial lamb. So you know that, hey, we're going to do this to her, so nobody else better not agree with what she's saying or what she has going forward. But I just could not, because I would want somebody to speak out for my daughter. I looked at them as if they were my daughter, my aunt, my uncle, my mother, my dad, you know, and somebody wanting to have that voice for them. So it was a strong compellation. It was a strong pull to say, hey, you got to ask, not knowing that it would lead to this. And I'm grateful for this. I wouldn't change it for anything, because I would want somebody at some point to say, hey, the madness has to stop.
Yes, thank you so much, so much. So happy that you're standing up and just thinking of our sisters in there and what they're going through, and that they have an ally, a strong voice for them is so important. And just thank you again so much for this work you're doing, and that you're not alone, that there's so many people just so inspired. So Helga, I saw you nodding your head. I want to ask you some of the same things, and what kind of came to mind as you were listening to the solidarity expressed by Ms. Wooten.
Mhm.
And do you see some intersectionality between racism and sexism in your life or your work?
Of course, just about every day. But I think one focal point here, going back on what was just said by Ms. Wooten, is that we have, if we want to look at the real racism, it's the US intervention that has happened south in Mexico, Central America, all the way down into Tierra del Fuego in Chile. This is US intervention since the 1800s and has continued and perpetuated itself to where it is now. So they talk about, they just want to come to the US for, because they're going to give them, a better life. But at the same time, they had a life. And each step of the way, when they tried to organize their communities, maintain cultural values and practices, were crushed every step of the way. So the US intervention in Mexico, South, Central America, I mean, that is the real root cause of people losing their indigenous identity, coming from pueblos in Mexico. So many native languages, so many native ceremonials. Same thing in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras. But now even that identity has been stripped from them. So their language, their way of life, detachment from their land. So I think those are the real root cause of what now Ms. Wooten is dealing with in those detention centers. I mean, I lived on that militarized zone for 13 years. We had guns pointing at us. Benishi got to see that militarized zone and what we were living under. So I take it back, if we really want to talk about the real oppressor and the real racism at hand. I mean, again, it's a ripple effect all the way from the doctrine of discovery and that mindset. So for me, I think in a lot of ways, it's what I deal with here is, and making structural change in councils that have held the power here, developing food policy for our state, have had that, held the power. And that's why Big Ag is the only one that gets discussed at the Roundhouse in Santa Fe. We're making those changes. How are we doing it? By putting our theories into practice and actually fighting them back, presenting our data, presenting our science and facts and data on all different levels of the realm of community health, building wealth, and living with honor and dignity. Being able to speak our language, being able to educate our kids the way we want. Back in the mid 1990s, I pulled my kids out of school and we homeschooled them when there were no resources or tools to homeschool your kids at that time, especially on the border in Brownsville. But I had to do it because I was not having that racist bullshit taught to my kids. My kids were not having it either. And they were targeted as troublemakers for arguing untruthful facts as our history. So I want to give other, I know we have a little bit of time. I'd like to give Lady time to respond as well. But again, thanking everyone for tuning in, and it's been a real honor. And I would like to continue being, maybe not on the panel, but coming in and tapping in through Facebook like everyone else. So thank you.
Thank you so
Lady-
much.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
yes. I'm just going to say that I was going to turn it over to Venetia to ask our last question.
Yeah, I have a question for Lady as we come to wrap this up. So 2 things I want to share is we had the idea of doing this and this discussion, and much of it was around this idea of how violation of land has impacted us as peoples, both Black and Indigenous peoples, and how violation of body has impacted us in different ways, both as Black and Indigenous peoples. It's happened to us both, but it happens in different slight ways, right? And so, you know, for Indigenous women, it's taking away the access to have children through forced sterilization, and you know, through the time of slavery, then the violation of body was to produce more children, right? And so it's happened to both of our peoples, but in much different ways. And so we were thinking of this, and then the people came together, you know, Don and Ladai, like people came together. And so we were starting to think, oh, there was spirit leading this discussion because things happened the way they did, and they were kind of quickly happened. The second reason why we know spirit, that I know spirit was part of this, is when you were talking earlier, I had a moment of recalling a dream, and of you correcting me about the pronunciation of your name. And so I dreamt about this moment and didn't know it until it just passed. And then I was like, oh, I remember this now. I recall this dream happening some time ago. But this idea of violations on the body and on women, you know, I want to ask you, Ladai, to just sort of bring us to the end here. Ask this question: is what do you think it's going to take to change? Like, what does that change? Elga offered this, like putting into practice our theories. What is your offering of what do you think it's going to take to change this happening, this violation happening to women, our femme identified people?
Woo, so that one now, I got what, 2 minutes and don't know all the
As you need.
But so what will take change? Well, one thing which we're doing here, and a lot of people before us has done that, and there is a consciousness now that is becoming larger. It's more in sync of what it meant, why land is so significant, and why women are so significant when we're talking about colonialization. And I think that it boils down to understanding the life process. And that is connected to culture. And I don't mean life in terms of just giving birth, but what is essential for the land as mother to nurture, to have water, to have soil, to produce the things that protects us, and what is essential for us as women to produce the things that protects and nurtures our community. So one thing I think is to be able to dissect and perhaps decolonize what we have been taught holistically. And of course, culturally, we know, but I need to know what the indigenous teachings were. Like, let's have that conversation. Let's have the conversations, what the teachings were from our African folks. You brought up spirituality. I definitely believe that. And I believe that our ancestors have crossed the same land for whatever reason, whether they crossed it because they were being put out by the system, or whether they crossed it because they were being brought to the land in order to redesign what its purpose was. So I think that these conversations are critical in that. I think another thing too is to reclaim what that purpose was and how we associate it with the land. An example, we talk about the medical systems and the practice, and I'll make this quick. One of the things with colonialism, a lot that comes out of that is white supremacy. And the thing that is the same through all of that is that women are at the bottom. Now, when we start coming culturally, certain culture of women are even lower. That's why feminism has a lot of different definitions to it, if you ask us. But a significance of that is why, to understand why that was. If we can understand the why, then we understand that the God or whatever the higher power is that we believe is there is in us. And when we understand that it's in us and that the change happens when we just change it, then we become powerful enough to confront that and to just do the change. I'm no longer going to adhere to this. Right now, COVID-19, I grew up in Albany, Georgia. It was one of the first hotspots in the nation. Predominantly Black folks with COVID, not getting care. In Dawson, the hospital was closed years ago. You know what a preventative measure is? It's that herb thing that my grandmother used to give us because they didn't have access to that medical, to the hospital. They used to give us that just to prevent colds. Now we're in a conversation to think about what those women used to give us from the earth, from the soil, that we put in our body that prevented us and protected us from things like COVID. And so I think acknowledging that, bringing it up, having more conversations and being able to confront it head on and to actually say no and to start re-educating. How are we talking about it like this? To start re-educating and resurfacing some of that knowledge that we have, and then we'll be in a place to better understand collectively what we're going up against, and we could have a collective strategy for how we then combat that. And I think that that ties in to women and the land, the connection to it, and our health system. We got to tackle it, but we can tackle it in that way.
Thank you. I'm tagging you back in, Simone.
All right, then. All right. What?
I was just going to say, I have been on the verge of tears listening to the stories that, you know, Don, Elga, and Simone, others have shared. And then at the same, like right when I'm about to like just lose it and start crying, you say something really powerful. Like, and so thank you, all four of you.
Thank you. Yes, the same. I kept almost crying every time I asked a question, because not just for like, just becoming, I'm overwhelmed and I'm feeling the power, and all the good ways and all the strong ways too, as we struggle together in dignity, as we build and recognize existing solidarity, as we commit to our sisters and our relatives, our Mother Earth, and Spirit. And so I'm just really, I'm full from this very beautiful conversation, but also anxious for more. And so we invite you to continue to visit our webinars every new and full moon. Although I think we're skipping the next one because it's on Halloween and we got, you know, stuff to do. But yes, we're going to continue to have these conversations, and they are always overlapping and intersecting in ways that we both anticipate, and in ways that are beautifully surprising to us and inform and teach us, and we learn something new every single time. So thank you so much. Please continue to tune in, and we also do like to ask people to come back, so we might be tapping you again. tapping you on the shoulder again.
Thank you. Saint Lan, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Love you,
Thank you
sisters.
all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Elga. Thank you, Ladai. All of our interpreters,
Yay.
translators. Thank you for Jennifer for holding the back tech. Thank you, Simone, for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
And
you all.
for
Much love.
Everybody stay safe.
All right.